I wanted to follow up on my last video where I basically ripped Payday 3's upper management a new ass. And I, along with the rest of you, I'm sure were very intrigued at what Mats had to say about the recent outrage at the Q3 reports. So I watched a whole live stream with him and Almir answering questions from the chat, with some of them being the most stupid questions. Like, y'all really thought asking about community weekends for double XP and money was really urgent enough to ask the CEO while he is here responding to the backlash they just faced? And I know the majority of questions were good ones, so if that comment wasn't meant for you, just duck. But it seems like the community was split on the priorities they wanted to hear from him. And I guess we'll get right into his response and actually start with my question, which was the first to be answered. And a really important one at that, because it's something we wouldn't have had any clue on otherwise, was the overall morale in the studio. And this was his response.
ATCU says, hey guys, how is morale in the studio?
How's the morale? I think we've been through, as you all know, I mean, it's been a tough year for everybody here, but everybody loves Payday. So we are highly dedicated to do our best every day, and we're constantly working on getting the spirit up every day. So I think that's I think the morale is quite high still, and I think it can always improve, of course. But I think most people are very happy to be here and do their best every day.
Okay, right off the bat, I gotta call you out, Mats. My boy, I promise I'm not trying to sound like a pretentious asshole, but how would you know the morale of the individuals who are working day to day, knowing that if they don't turn this thing around, this game around, soon they might be out of a job? Red Archer, I'm sure, has his video up already, and he re-asked basically my same thought in a follow-up question, and this is how Mats responded again.
So a situation when you have, being a company that's not so big, as I said before, we're quite small. We're in total 190 people in the company, and we're running Baxter and Payday as projects. And when we move, we can't always move people between the project because competence doesn't always fit to 100%. And then we need to do competence shifts in the company. That's the same thing as you do in all companies, I say. It's never a good situation to be in. If we would have been bigger, had more projects, it would have been easier to mitigate that. Unfortunately, we can't at the moment, so we need to do a little bit of a competence shift. And I'm really sorry about the employees that has to leave because of that, but it's just something we need to do in order to be efficient and have the ability to deliver best we can for each project.
I'm not calling him a liar, but I'm just not sold on the idea that morale is at an all-time high. I mean, layoffs and poor sales performance go hand in hand as some of the most depressing shit you can have happen as a dev team. But maybe he is right. Again, I just don't know enough, and neither do any of us, to determine whether or not this is actually true. Maybe he does go check up on each team or group of devs and can tell the spirits are high despite all the turmoil and headache they must be dealing with. But all in all, I do appreciate this being answered, not just because it was my question, but more importantly, I think that we as a community, well, not just in this community, really as like a gaming community as a whole, have a tendency to forget what the devs themselves feel is actually one of the most important aspects to making and maintaining a positive culture where they can do their best work. But if I had to rate his answer for this question, I give it like an 8 out of 10 maybe. Again, just because I can't confirm, like, of course, he's not going to just go off there and say, nope, the vibes are just in the bin, but what's happened over the last week has affected this team super negatively. Of course, he's not going to say that, but I don't get the feeling that he was being like entirely disingenuous, so I give it about an 8 out of 10. Okay, and on the question 2, which was about whether or not Mats could go into detail regarding the financial situation over at Starbreeze. And this one really gave me some serious deja vu. And later in the stream, like, the deja vu just tripled. But I'll explain what I mean after you watch the clip.
Can you explain a bit about why you can't go into detail regarding financials, etc.? Because I don't think a lot of players are necessarily aware what it means to be a publicly traded company.
No, I can understand that. And it's Starbreeze been a listed company or stock listed company for many years. We are quite small company on the stock market, but still we are required to follow all the regulations that the stock market sets up, and there are a bunch of those. So we need to be very clear about our both what happened during the quarter, but also what our plans are going forward. So when we say lowering our investments, for instance, then that's a message to our investors, so they know that we're not going to spend exactly the same amount as we have before. That's a key message to send out, and we need to do that. That's required by the rules from the stock market. Else we will be fined and eventually put off the stock market, so we're not allowed to be there anymore.
Yeah, and something I think that might not be known to every heister out there is that a majority of video game companies that exist are privately held.
All perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. Being forthcoming to your investors checks out. Clearly stating your plans for the game going forward, all good in my book. But there's something crucial missing from this, don't you think? I'll give it a second in case you haven't figured it out already, but it's actually quite simple. Right, it's the player base. Like, dude, this team and miscommunication, they go hand in hand like it's Shaq and Kobe or something. Things such as, going radio silent for a month, or even in the past, what felt like months at a time, and then disclosing your plans to scale back investment does not inspire confidence in a fan base that is already hanging on by a thread to begin with. And you can debate whether or not this is true, that what he's saying is purely a message to investors, but won't affect the game's content pipeline, which is further clarified in this clip.
As CEO of a publicly traded video game, is it fair to say that investors are more important than the heisters gamers? And I can just say from my perspective, at no point has anyone said, you have to do this because the investors want us to, right? Mats and the leadership team gives us free rein to do what we think is best to improve the game and to make you heisters have the best experience you can. But from your perspective, do you see is one group more important than the other?
No, I think I would never say that the investors are more important, because they're not. What the investors do is give us freedom and also the ability to do things that, for instance, develop a game or improve a game like Payday now. That's what we get from the investors. So if we don't have the support from the investors, then we don't have the money to actually spend on the games. So that's why they are important. We need to keep them happy as well, and the only way to keep them happy is if we have a successful game. So it's very tied together in a very tight way. But I think of course the community when it comes to gamers heisters is the most important one. I mean, without you guys, we don't have the game and we don't have a company. So that's very clear.
Listen, I'm tired of this being a constant thing, but why does everything have to be so reactionary instead of proactive? Like, does no one anticipate these comments being seen in a negative light and not think to clear up the misconceptions before they're blown sky high and just demoralizes a community that thinks the game has one foot in the grave already? Again, we can neither confirm or deny what he's trying to clear up, if it's true or not. Whether they actually are ramping down support for Payday 3 and giving it essentially this studio's version of a skeleton crew, or maybe it's temporary for reasons like other development being increased for Project Baxter and even other games. But that transparency before all of this happened, I feel, is like the same old song and dance that we've been having for this company for a while now. I mean, God, I don't even know how long it's felt like, but definitely before the launch of Payday 3, it's just grown so tired, the feeling that this team cannot communicate with their fan base. But before we continue and you hear me rip into this answer Matt gives to Nanoli's question, I'd like to say it was good to see the actual CEO come onto the stream and not in fact send Almir and Andreas possibly to the wolves. I thought they might actually do that and just be brutal and cruel to those two for the mess that they created. But to credit the guy, he actually faced the community himself, even though he constantly looks to Papa Almir for assistance and basically waited for the questions to come his way rather than clearing things up himself. But I do appreciate that he didn't sweep this situation under the rug and actually stood on business, so to speak. But with that out of the way, here is his absolutely atrocious answer to Denoli asking what the dev team size currently looks like for Payday 3 in comparison to what it might be elsewhere in the company.
Here from Noli, one of our Starbase partners, who says, regarding the smaller team focused on continuously updating the game with new content, can you go into any detail regarding the size of that planned team? I assume it has been fully staffed and budgeted for year 2 at this point.
Yeah, it's not really about the team size. We can't say exactly how many we are because we never say that how many people that works on each project that we have. But it doesn't matter if we are 20 people or 80 people working on the game. It's still going to be 100% focused on doing the best content we can. So it will vary over time as well, depending on where we are, because people move between projects and so on. So.
Okay, this is by far his worst response he had during the entire stream, at least in my opinion. First off, I understand not disclosing the amount of people working on Payday 3 at the moment because it's a lose-lose situation for him. No matter what he says, no matter how high or low the number he gives, it will never be enough for the community. And for good reason, probably, seeing as the game's technical state is probably the worst it's been in a while. But to say it doesn't matter if you have 20 employees or 80 employees, and I understand that was a bit of an exaggeration, but to say the team size on the game that's had almost no polish per update and is still not in an amazing state right now, it literally blew my mind. When I clipped this part and to add it to the video, I rewatched it 4 or 5 times. This is the one I watched the most to make sure that what I just heard was correct, and sure enough, it is correct. I would have accepted something more along the lines of, let's see, I'm just going to bring it off the top of my head. You know, we have a great team working hard and they're doing their best work to improve and expand on what we've already done. I can't go into specific numbers, but I will say that we have a really good team who is dedicated to bringing this game up to the standard you as a community and our players hold it to. Something along the lines of that, but instead you leave more up in the air and more lingering doubts as to whether or not this game is understaffed. And I know that wasn't his intention, but you know the saying, perception is often more important than reality. People will see this as you basically sidestepping the question that's too difficult because you know the response is not going to be favorable. Okay, and the next thing is something that Almir brings up, and it's sort of to clarify their position on the game. And this is another very important comment that's made, so I'll play out the clip and give my thoughts on it afterwards.
Launch. Payday 3 has to be able to stand on its own 2 legs. Do you know what I mean about that, heisters? So Starbreeze has pushed in a lot of money into the game, right? But we're not seeing the revenue coming back compared to the investment we're pushing in. So that's why it's also important that Payday 3, in order to be successful for years to come, because we want it to be, and I want it to be, in my capacity, it needs to be able to stand on its own 2 legs.
You see, the most unfortunate bit is that, like I've said 200 times at this point, you only have one chance to make a good first impression, and especially for these type of games, once you've squandered that rather than live up to expectations, you're done. Just take Helldivers 2 for example. That game had the mass appeal of Forspoken before its launch, if I'm being honest, and guess what it did as a live service game? It subverted expectations. It was remarkably well polished, and the progression systems were tenfold more fleshed out than anything Payday 3 has done. Its co-op features in comparison are so vastly different, it's like comparing Black Ops 6 to X-Defiant. Those are just some of the few most important similarities that Helldivers 2 has done to blow up to incredible levels. And that's not even mentioning the communication between the studio's former, the Arrowhead's former CEO, Johan something, forget what his last name is. But his involvement with the update process with the community was unlike anything you see from any AAA studio that's not named Larian or CDPR back in the day. All of this was 100% avoidable. But again, this is where we are, and I just hope that going forward they stop with this reaction-based engagement and go for proactive engagement, because it's really not helping their case that Payday 3 is alive and well or is looking to be supported for years to come, or whatever they be saying. I'm more of a skeptic myself, and I need to see some evidence of that being even remotely true. But here's another question I found interesting, and one that I didn't think would be answered. One that directly has contributed to why I have been showing other game footages in the background instead of Payday 3.
Have you talked about hot fixes yet? Asked Alfred K. Game-breaking fixes are just taking too long. If that is because of certifications or because of the team size. I mean, it has nothing to do with the team size, because the fact of the matter is we are making updates for 5 platforms at the same time. All right. When we worked on Payday 2, after we stopped developing for consoles, we had to focus on only one platform, which makes everything much easier. Of course, it was extremely unfortunate back in the day for the console players, but that is a fact. Working with one platform is easier than working with 5, right? That's just how it is.
Just wait for them to be ready. This is where I differ from the community, and I always have and I always will. I'm not saying that this is definitely like they've been rushing them out, but it kind of feels like that this way with how it was worded. I'll never see eye to eye with y'all on the expectation of like 6 to 8 DLC updates with improvements and free content additions per update. I think that is utterly insane to expect. And when I see these updates that on the whole look pretty damn good, having game-breaking bugs and performance issues, I'd rather have 2 to 3 like really big content updates that are extremely polished every year, and then maybe another 2 to 3 smaller updates that improve on the base game as well. You can still add things like events and cool community challenges and not be burdened by unrealistic expectations that a lot of people seem to hold them to. And I understand that it should ultimately be up to Starbreeze to get these updates out in a consistent manner and with almost no issues to speak of. But I'm calling out the fan base on this one because y'all aren't exempt from criticism either. But to close out this video with one last question, I have a couple more noted down, but they're not like the most forefront important ones. The last one is Almir speaking on Payday 3's identity, and I'm happy he's finally brought this up because this is something I've seen from multiple creators. I watched one, I feel like it was like a week ago, from Safi Abakasis. I'll leave the link in the description, but here's a clip.
Find and establish Payday 3's own identity, because Andreas and I spoke about this a lot recently. It feels like Payday 3 doesn't know whether or not it's going to lean more to Payday the Heist or Payday 2, or if it's going to be its own thing, and we need to identify that properly during year 2 to make sure that the game has the best possible future.
People have been saying for ages that Payday 3 doesn't know what it wants to be. And I'll close out this video with some advice for Starbreeze, or really anyone who wants to listen and take this to heart. You determine what we play. What I mean by that is the artists, the animation team, the sound design team, the storyboard guys, the guys in charge of lore, the guys in charge of gameplay. I mean, hell, even the voice actors. All of you make up the game's identity, like itself. I really feel like this is so prevalent and relevant in the games industry today. With as many remakes and remasters as we see today, it's clear most companies don't know, or maybe they don't know how to find that identity. There's always the feeling to cater to a certain group of people or players, but that's not what games were based on. Back then, it used to start with an interesting idea or story, and then just took it from there. Whether or not the idea lands or not was unimportant, really. I think Payday 3 going forward should have its own identity, not to completely forget the past 2 games, but anyone who's played Payday the Heist and Payday 2 can tell you just how different those 2 games feel in tone. I don't think you need to incorporate a bit of both of those games into this one, but rather take it in its own direction, and one that's more transparent and less buggy at that would be ideal. But yeah, that's about it from the stream with CEO Matt Sewell, I think it is. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I've never been good with names. But anyways, on a whole, I thought that it was not too bad. Again, I'm glad he faced the community and responded to the backlash as a whole. And while I'm still not super confident that Payday 3 will last beyond maybe summer 2026, I'd say, it's good to see that communication, and we need this to be a permanent thing, like honestly. The next time we need to sit down and talk about our feelings, because that's what this feels like a lot of the times, I'm out. And I'm sure a lot of people will be as well. But let me know what you thought about the stream and the clips I shared. I'm sure other YouTubers have already turned this inside out, so most of you have already made up your minds, but I'm just curious to hear what you guys have to say as well. Anyways, I'll see you next time.